Do you want to bust your sales quota? Do you want to join the ranks of top 1% sellers? The Top 1% Sellers podcast gives you the insights and the tools to help you achieve your sales greatness. The podcast features sales and services professionals, leaders, and experts to give you the edge you're looking for. Here's your host, Ash Sadiq.
And this is a beautiful segment for us to start talking more about the delivery piece of high stakes presentations and conversations. And I know in some of your work, you also talk about nonverbal communications. You talk about the quality of the voice. So maybe let's sort of delve into that, and then say, you've got all this, easy work done. As you said, if they really think about what they need to hear versus what they need to tell them, and then now you are coming in to actually deliver it. Maybe we start with the things that typically a lot of speakers do wrong, and maybe we start there, which would help us also uncover what the right things to do are.
Yeah. Well, this is based on research. The 3, 4, 5 things that people do that makes the listener either disconnect or discredits the speaker are the following. Number one is their voice tends to go flat and go monotone. They're not monotone, but they go monotone.
Yes.
Secondly, they're incongruent. Their body is doing one thing and their words are saying another. And let me see if I can get my, if I cross my arms and say, listen, I really want to open up and share some of my thoughts with you, which do you believe? We listen to the body first. We are highly trained to listen to the body language first. You don't actually have to go to school or read a book. Your instincts will tell you, I don't trust this person. I don't know why.
Yes.
Or he looked uncomfortable, or she seemed like she wasn't quite there. So we're watching the body, and we notice within a fraction of a second when something is off. Now here's the good news.
Yes.
You don't need to study body language because you automatically are congruent when you're congruent.
Yes.
In other words, when you're being authentic, your body will do what it's supposed to do. But, it's just like when detectives pull somebody into one of those rooms, one of the ways they know you're lying is they see the body do one thing and they hear the words do another, and they go, okay, mark it down.
Yes.
The third thing is the breath. Now, people don't say he's breathing funny or she's breathing funny, but when, what we often call vocal problems aren't really vocal problems. The problem is I'm not breathing. And you can, if I stop breathing, or if I kind of talk like this, where I just take shallow breaths, you go, he's kind of quiet. And what happens is you'll stop breathing as well. And the problem is not that I'm quiet. The problem is I'm not breathing.
Yes.
When I breathe, you breathe. So the body, the voice, and finally the eyes. Now, I think a lot of people are told you got to make eye contact.
Yeah.
You don't have to make eye contact the whole time, but if you're hiding and you're constantly searching down here, or you're shifting your eyes in ways that don't land,
Yes.
and allow the listener to see you, then it triggers a distrust. So learning how to use your eyes in a way where you create what we call connected conversations.
Yes.
For all of us, there are moments when we have to look away because we gather our thoughts. That's okay. In fact, it's desirable. You give the listener a break for a minute, but you have to come back.
Yes.
It's not a desire to hide. It's a moment where I gotta think. And if you're thinking visually, you'll tend to look up. If you're thinking kinesthetically, which is feelings, it felt, I don't know, I was a little uneasy. Head will tend to go down. But we saw this beautiful, it was so good. Eyes will go up.
Yes.
Depending on what you're retrieving.
Yes.
Anyway, it's, sort of a technical point, but let people see your eyes. You have to have vocal variety, not just for the sake of sounding pretty, but what the voice does is it helps you articulate the nuance of ideas. If you're trying to hold the listener's attention, there's a musicality to every single idea. There's a music to every sentence. You don't need to be a trained actor. You don't need to go get voice lessons. People do this naturally, but when we're under pressure, we tend to compress the voice and then we tend to go flat. So let me tell you a little bit about the company and what we do and all of that. We tend to go, and you know, that's not my voice. That's my weird voice when I'm feeling nervous and under pressure.
Exactly. You know, one of the questions that popped up on the screen, you know, some people basically are saying, you know, sometimes you prepare your points of discovery, you go in the meeting, the client seems to have a different timeline for when they want to get through certain things.
Yeah.
Right? And then as a sales professional, you're under pressure. You're trying to essentially kind of push the deal through the steps, right? How do you handle that sort of disconnect between how fast I want to move as a sales professional and how slow perhaps my client wants to move?
Yeah, so how do you manage the experience?
Yeah.
You know, we do a lot of work with politicians, and it's just like this. I mean, I've got a bunch of stuff I want to say, but I've got to listen to you, Ash. You're conducting the interview, so I got to figure out how to address the questions that you're asking, and if I want to expand upon it, I can within reason. I'm also keeping an eye on you. Okay, enough, Peter. Let's move on to the next question. Listen, you want to have a plan. I want to hit these 3 points. I want to move them through this. But what's happened over the past 25 years is that the listening habits of the customer have dramatically changed because of computer technology. Most people are used to listening with a mouse, and I'm speaking sort of metaphorically and realistically. They want to point and click at what they want to know about, and they're used to being in control. People don't want to sit passively. So they go, you know what, I don't need to hear about that. Just move on to the technology. I want to hear more about the technology, or tell me about the benefits. Forget all that stuff. Just tell me the cost.
Yeah.
How much does it cost? And what kind of a deal can you give us?
Exactly.
We all know this. And, you know, what do? It's a judgment call. This is a judgment call. There isn't a single answer to it.
Yes.
We're always managing the experience. In general, your job is to meet the needs of the listener, the intellectual, business, and emotional needs of the listener. But generally, if they say, look, cut to the chase, how much does it cost?
Yes. Yeah.
You can try to reframe the question and say, let me first talk about value, and then let me tell you what the investment's going to be.
Yes.
Which isn't a bad way to go. Or you can say, look, here's what the cost is.
Yes.
And if you'll give me a moment, let's look at the cost in relationship to the value that it brings. They may then give you permission to go back to what you wanted to talk about. But let's face it, no plan survives the CEO. So you got to go in there, especially if you're talking to C-level executives or anybody for that matter, savvy buyer, and they're going to zigzag on you, and you've got to be able to dance with them in the direction that they go in.
Absolutely. And I'd love for you to also, you know, similar to what we did in a few minutes ago, give them a sense also when you work with them on delivery with Stand and Deliver group. I'd love them to get a sense of if I'm not so good in that direction, because you just talked about being present, being able to manage the conversation, and being very conscious of what your original plan is. So typically, what would you do with either a group or an individual when you're trying to kind of really help them get a difference in their delivery skills?
When we work with somebody on their delivery, you know, a whole team or an individual, we start with, what's the brand? What's your brand? How do you want to be known? You know, we worked with a giant investment firm, and we did a lot of work on what is the reputation that you want to have out there. And they were very clear. They wanted to be academic, which was interesting. They wanted to come, a lot of them were former professors, academic, understated, never bragging, and have a quiet certainty, a kind of confidence, but a humble confidence. And they wanted to lead with the science of investing. And you can start to get the picture.
Yes.
So these are not, hey, let me tell you about our great investment. It's more of an intellectual approach. So once we understand how an organization or an individual sees themselves, and they don't always know, so sometimes we have to work with them on identifying what is that unique brand that you want to project. And then secondly, we start to let's look at the narratives or the stories, the themes, the language. How are you going to represent this in terms of the words and the ideas?
Yes.
And then from there, we can start to look at, so who are you? Because you can't make you. You're not going to go out there and play a character. You have to be you.
Yes.
And how do we take who you essentially are as an authentic human being and vitalize that? Just the same way that you work with an athlete, you're taking the essential strengths of the athlete and making them stronger. So we'll work with them on their own presence. And some of it's eliminating bad habits.
Yes.
And some of it is shining up the virtues. What are the virtues this person has? How do we take it to the next level?
Very, very interesting. So you're really coupling the brand of the company that they work for, how they want to be seen, and then come back and look at that person's unique abilities, unique features when they present and speak.
You have to. When I was in show business, when I was in theater and film, we did the same thing. You're working with an actor who's going to play the character, but you're still working with that actor. Let's look at how we can work with this actor and look at her or his strengths as he steps into the shoes of this character. They're always playing some element of themselves in that character. Yeah. It's a little, to some extent true when we sell. You have to be yourself, but it's you in the role of a salesperson representing this product or service to this customer.
Yes, very good point. As you were speaking about this, I also remembered, the work you do around stories. And I think for some people, sometimes if they take the points of discovery, sometimes it might come across as very stilted, we're going to go through point 1, 2, 3, but maybe a story sometimes will act as a different frame. I'd love for you to maybe speak to that from a delivery perspective, what a different stories actually make in high stakes conversations. And then let's also talk about how can they develop and become good storytellers.
Well, thank you. So stories. Logic, of course, makes people think.
Yeah.
Emotion makes people act. And stories are unique in the sense that they create emotion, they create feeling, they can create stickiness. We tend to remember stories, we tend to forget the facts. But if you can bookend your pitch, in other words, start and finish with some kind of a story, it wraps the whole narrative in a kind of ribbon and puts it in a different drawer in the brain.
Yeah.
People will remember it.
Very, very interesting. Very interesting. And when you work with people to help them develop that area, where do you typically start with them to make sure they get the value of it and then start really developing the skills to deliver stories like that?
Well, whether we're working with an individual or an organization, we start with where do you want to go? That's all, it's the same thing we teach in narrative. What's your outcome? What's your goal? Where do you want to be in 3 years or in 13 years? Where are you going? Where are you going with your leadership? And that's the core theme that we bring to this is where are you leading? And you don't need to have a C-suite title or 4 stars on your shoulder, but what are the ideas that you're bringing into the world? How do you want to make a difference? How do you want to contribute? And we always work from that place of leadership. How are you showing up and what do you stand for? Again, you don't need to be like, I'm going to change the world and fix global warming, but what is it that you're about? Yeah. What are the values and virtues that you really stand for, regardless of what you're selling and what you're about? And what are the sales targets you're after? Are you trying to become, top salesperson or a sales manager, or are you trying to become CEO of the company?
Yeah.
Let's start with the goals and then work backwards like we would with any strategic plan. Sometimes we're working with, I work with everybody from presidential candidates to PhD candidates. I'll work with somebody who's going in for their PhD thesis and they've got to get before the board. I work with everybody. I mean, especially love working with students.
Peter, thank you so much for being here. And thank you everyone for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to the Top 1% Sellers podcast. Give us your suggestions and guest recommendations by emailing us at ash@connectwithash.com. Thank you also for sharing this podcast with your colleagues and social media contacts. To connect with us on LinkedIn, please send a connect request to ash@connectwithash.com. See you at our next episode. Thanks for tuning in.